Okay, I'm going to add a marker. All right, so this is a sprint takeover for The Slow Death of Latin by Cajetan. So let's take an initial look at, oh, okay, it's kind of it's a short article, okay. This is for the latest Flash challenge. All right. Follow the Roman Empire, the Church, teaching Latin. Okay. For many years, Latin was one of the most important languages around the Mediterranean Sea. As the mother tongue of the Romans, comma, it was the first language of the Roman Empire. Period. For many years after the Earth's empire's fall, Latin was an important part of the education of the elites, especially in the early modern era up to the early 20th century. Okay. So just again, I am really picky about shorter sentences, especially in nonfiction writing, and missing a couple commas there. But all in all, good intro paragraph. Okay, the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire and resulting migrations and socioeconomic changes were the first stage of Latin slow death. Okay, so here you have a list of three things. You have the fall of the Roman Empire, resulting migrations, and socioeconomic changes. Okay, so we got that. Let's turn the, I have to change that. I'm terrible with my left hand. Um, mm, okay, so with this, you could use a comma separated value. So the fall of the Roman Empire. Not that. Okay, move that back in space. Click that, comma. Well, okay, maybe here's a better question, because you have the fall of the Roman Empire and resulting migrations and socioeconomic changes. So it's not a series of three equal things. And so that would, my previous thought is wrong, because the fall of the Roman Empire, the resulting migrations and economic changes. Um, I would switch this around. I would I would say the first stages of Latin slow death began with the fall of the Roman Empire. Yeah. Well, the first stages of Latin slow death began with the fall of the Roman Empire. This the fall caused migrations and socioeconomic changes, something like that. Yeah. So I think one major problem I have is passive voice, or putting the result before the subject. Here, the idea of this sentence is to describe the initial steps of Latin's slow death. And so you're describing the items of the slow death, but we don't know that these are items about the slow death until the end of the sentence. And my suggestion is just to switch it around. So we say, this is the slow death, these are the results of the slow death, and then separate it in paragraphs as needed. Okay. All right. The following Dark Ages were a time when the literacy rate in Europe dropped. Power was in the hands of the cultural groups who spoke different languages. than than. I would just say, spoke languages other than Latin. Okay? It resulted in Latin and those languages mixing and creating the modern languages. I would avoid pronouns such as it, he, she, they. Yeah, if you just remember, then is related with time, than is related in comparisons. Yeah. I don't have a mnemonic device to help to remember that. But I really personal opinion, I don't like the use of pronouns such as it in a situation where you're trying to explain something. So I would probably say, well, it resulted in Latin. Well, the migrations resulted. The use of different languages resulted. So that's my thing. The Church. Latin survived for many years after the fall of the Roman Empire thanks to Christianity and, most importantly, the Catholic Church. Depending on how you want to phrase that sentence, you could leave it as is, or the way I read it is I separated that out. Latin survived for many years after the fall of the Roman Empire thanks to Christianity and, most importantly, the Catholic Church. So if you want that emphasis on, and most importantly, to kind of stand out a little bit, using commas to separate it off as a parenthetical phrase will actually help bring more emphasis to that. But if you don't, it could read like, Latin survived for many years after the fall of the Roman Empire, thanks to Christianity and, most importantly, the Catholic Church. Without that parenthetical separation of that phrase, it makes the sentence long and there's no place to breathe. Or for your mind to take a mental rest to say, I process this information, I can process this, I can process that. You're as currently punctuated, you're making my brain have to consume all of that information at one time, as opposed to using commas. You can say, okay, this, this, and this, and I can consume that information in smaller bites. Yeah, Latin is a scholarly language. For centuries, the Bible and the Masses were only in Latin. The second half of the 20th century was the time when Latin was almost completely abandoned by the Church. In 1967, the pontifical universities in Rome, where many of the Church's future leaders are educated, stopped teaching Latin. In recent years, small groups of traditionalists are trying to renew the use of Latin during Masses, but with little success. Okay. And I do think that Sudan has a good point here. Your document here talks about the Roman Empire, the Church, and teaching Latin. I think that there would be a good reason to have a section here about scholarship and Isaac Newton and that kind of stuff if you want to add that. Yeah, the important part of the educations of the elite. But if you're wanting to expand that more. Oh, yeah, the emphasis on the Roman Catholic Church seems to run counter to this. Just in time to say goodbye. Yeah, we still got a couple minutes, though. Teaching Latin. For many years, Latin was considered an elite language. Okay. And knowing Latin was a sign of a good education. Okay. Period. That knowing Latin was a sign of a good education. Even in the second half of the 20th century, many schools still taught Latin. Again, an idea of switching it. Many schools still taught Latin even up to the second half of the 20th century. It's just this is getting into your voice and how you phrase things, and it would be, you know, again, this is my personal opinion, is it's important to make sure that we know the subject about which you're talking at the beginning of the sentence, and then adding that information afterwards. However, today it is rarely a case. Nowadays, most university students of classics, history, philosophy, etc., and and some enthusiasts study Latin. Again, nowadays, I would say nowadays, Latin is studied by mostly university students of classics and some enthusiasts. So you just take that and then move it up earlier in the sentence there. Okay. Yeah, and so I think that this is a really good article, a good start of an article. I really think that you should expand it, because you do have the religious significance of the preservation of Latin, but also the idea of the preservation of scholarly information as well, such as Isaac Newton that was talked about earlier. So you have a balance of the church and state on the preservation and the use of Latin, even in the modern era. So, because I would definitely agree that education and the study of the classics, history, etc., have slowed the decline of Latin just as much as the church has. So.